Dusk settles over the front like a tired hand, dragging the last traces of color out of the sky. What remains is a world shaped in grays and cold metal, softened only by the slow fall of snow. The fighting has ended for the day, though no one really believes it. Silence after battle is never peace. It is only a pause between breaths. The air smells of gunpowder and frozen earth, a scent the soldiers have learned to ignore in the same way they ignore their own fear. Captain Reinhard Müller moves through the abandoned Soviet trench with a lantern held close to his chest. Its small amber glow feels almost indecent in the fading light, as if warmth has no right to exist in a place built for killing. His men follow a short distance behind, boots crunching in rhythm, but they do not speak. They sense something restless inside him tonight, something that pulls him forward faster than usual. The skirmish had been brief, messy, chaotic, over in minutes, but Reinhard has returned to the field with a purpose even he cannot fully name. He tells himself he's checking for intelligence, verifying enemy positions, ensuring no wounded remain. But beneath all that, buried deep under the layers of rank and discipline, is an older instinct. The instinct of someone who once promised a younger brother he would always come home. Snow catches on the edges of broken rifles and torn satchels. A kettle lies overturned beside a shallow foxhole, its contents frozen mid-spill. Such small details hold the strange power to humanize the enemy, and Reinhard feels the familiar tug of discomfort. Training teaches officers to look past these things, to see only the uniform and not the person inside it. But tonight, something pushes him to look closer. He steps over a half-collapsed dugout and stops. The lantern light slides across a mound of snow and metal until it catches on a curved shape, an infantry helmet, dented along the rim. It sits awkwardly, half buried, as if the earth itself tried to swallow it in the chaos. Reinhard kneels. His gloves brush away the frost. The helmet is Soviet, painted in the dull green he has seen countless times. There is nothing unusual about it, nothing sinister, nothing heroic, just another artifact of a war that consumes everything it touches. Then he turns it. Inside, scratched with a desperate, uneven hand, is a name, a German name. A name that does not belong in this trench, on this helmet, in this war, on this side of the line. Otto Müller. For a moment, Reinhard forgets how to breathe. The world narrows to a single point of sound, the snow thump of his own heartbeat echoing against the metal in his hands. His younger brother's name looks back at him like an accusation, like a plea, like a ghost waiting to be acknowledged. Fear rises first, then disbelief, then something deeper than both. Because this is impossible, and yet here it is, cold and undeniable in the dying light. The wind sharpens as Reinhard stands there, still holding the helmet as if it might shatter with too much pressure, or vanish if he loosens his grip. Snow brushes against his coat, collecting along the shoulders like pale ash. Behind him, his men shift uneasily. They know this silence. It is the kind that comes before a commander gives an order, not before he loses himself in memory. "Sir," one of them murmurs, "leave it. It's Soviet equipment, nothing more." Another adds a little too quickly, "We shouldn't be touching enemy relics." They speak with the certainty drilled into them, the certainty Reinhard himself once taught them. Do not humanize the enemy. Do not assign meaning to objects that belong to them. Do not hesitate. But the rules sound hollow tonight. Reinhard runs a thumb across the scratched letters. They are jagged, clumsy, carved by someone with freezing hands or desperate ones. A faint tremor passes through him, not from the cold, but from recognition. Otto never had neat handwriting. Even as a boy, he carved his name in the barn door back home with the same uneven angles. A memory presses through the frost. Otto standing under the apple tree, too young to be holding a rifle, but old enough to believe the posters that promised honor, purpose, belonging. Reinhard had laughed then, ruffled Otto's hair, and told him he'd look after him no matter where the war sent them. He never imagined where would be here, on a front that swallowed men whole. Another image follows, their mother at the doorstep the day Otto left, clutching Reinhardt's arm, whispering a trembling request for a miracle. At the time, she thought she meant safety. Now she realizes she meant something far rarer, returning whole, heart intact. The men wait for Reinhardt to snap back into the shape of the officer they recognize. Instead, he lowers his head, almost reverently, and slips the helmet under his coat. Their surprise ripples through the air. "Sir." "It's mine now," Reinhardt said quietly, though he knows how irrational it sounds. The helmet is enemy property, potentially dangerous, entirely inappropriate for an officer to keep. And yet it feels like the only warm thing left in this landscape of ruin. The cold wind presses harder, tugging at his coat as if trying to pull him back into the safety of doctrine. But Reinhard has already stepped beyond it. The moment he pockets the helmet, he commits a small rebellion, not against his superiors, but against the idea that war can strip a man of his humanity. For the first time in months, he allows himself to feel like a brother instead of a soldier. The night deepens by the time Reinhardt reaches the makeshift holding shelter. Snow has begun to fall harder, drifting sideways like loose pages torn from a book the wind no longer knows how to read. A guard stands outside, stamping his feet for warmth, rifle slung loosely over his shoulder. When he sees Reinhard approach, he straightens, the metal clicking sharply in the cold. "Only one survived, sir," the guard reports. "Barely a boy, frozen more than wounded." Reinhard nods, though something inside him tightens. A single prisoner, rescued from the same skirmish, alive long enough to have seen things, maybe too fragile to lie, maybe too tired to care. Inside the shelter, the air is thick with damp straw and human breath. The Russian sits hunched in a corner, arms wrapped around himself, shivering beneath a torn greatcoat. Frostbite stains his fingers a ghostly white. He looks up when Reinhardt enters, eyes wide, the instinctive fear of a captive flashing through them. Reinhardt braces for defiance, the hardened stare, the clenched jaw, the sullen silence he has seen 100 times. But the boy's expression holds something stranger, something gentler. His gaze carries both terror and pity, as if he recognizes grief when he sees it, even across enemy lines. Reinhardt takes a slow step forward. "You were with the men who held this trench?" The boy hesitates, then gives a small nod. Reinhardt retrieves the helmet from beneath his coat. Its dull metal glints softly in the lamplight. The prisoner's eyes widen. He shifts upright, wincing at the movement, gaze fixed on the scratched name inside the rim. "You know this man?" Reinhardt asked, though the words almost fail him. The boy swallows. His voice trembles through broken German, each syllable shaped by cold and fatigue. "Yes, I knew him." The room stills. Even the guard stops breathing for a moment. No interrogation technique could have produced a more honest answer. No threat could have carved such sincerity into the boy's voice. Reinhardt's heart jolts painfully, but the soldier in him whispers suspicion. "How?" he demanded, though not with anger, more with desperate hope.
The boy meets his eyes. There is no hatred there, only sympathy, raw and unexpected. "He was hurt," the Russian murmurs. We helped him." The simplicity of the statement breaks something open inside Reinhard, something frozen long before this night. He expected resistance, lies, or at least indifference. Instead, he finds compassion, offered by someone who should have had none to spare. For a brief, fragile moment, enemy and captor stand not as opposites, but as two young men caught inside a war neither asked for, bound by the memory of a third who touched both their lives. The Russian boy's breath comes in thin clouds, each one dissolving before it reaches the lamplight. He seems to gather strength not from warmth, there is little of that here, but from the weight of the memory he carries. Reinhard waits, tense, bracing himself for a truth he isn't sure he wants. "He did not die by us," the boy said softly. "Your brother, Otto, he lived." The words struck Reinhard harder than any artillery blast. His grip tightens on the helmet until the edge cuts into his palm. Everything he has been taught, every lecture, every speech, every rule, insists that Soviets do not save German soldiers. But the boy continues, his voice steadier now, as if he is speaking not to an enemy officer, but to someone who deserves the truth. "He was wounded," the prisoner said, "shot in the leg. We found him during a retreat. Not soldiers, partisans, farmers, hunters, old men who could not run fast." His eyes drift downward. "And me." Reinhard feels the ground tilt beneath him. You took him in?" The boy nods. "We thought he would die, but he asked for nothing, only water." A faint, almost embarrassed smile touches his lips. "He tried to stand the next day, stubborn, like someone who thinks pain is only a suggestion." Reinhard closes his eyes for a moment. That stubbornness, yes, that was Otto. The boy continues, speaking slowly to keep the cold from stealing his words. "We shared food with him, bread, potatoes when we had them. He insisted on helping us repair tools. He fixed a broken stove, translated papers we captured." His expression softens, growing distant. "At night, he sat by the fire with us, told stories about the river near his home, said the water there was so clear you could see stones on the bottom."
Reinhard imagines his brother sitting among supposed enemies, warming his hands over a fire built by men he was told were barely human. He pictures Otto laughing in a language they did not understand, offering pieces of himself simply because that was who he was. The image cuts deeper than any blade. "He stayed many weeks," the boy says, his voice nearly a whisper. "We did not treat him as a prisoner. He was one of us." Those final words shatter the last of Reinhardt's defenses. Pride, the hard, rigid pride drilled into him since officer school, gives way to something quieter, heavier: humility, gratitude, a dawning realization that the world he thought he understood is far more complicated than the posters on barracks walls ever suggested. For the first time in the war, Reinhardt feels small, not diminished, but human. And in that shrinking, something vast opens inside him, the possibility that kindness survives even in the bleakest winter. Morning arrives without warmth, only a pale, washed-out light that barely distinguishes sky from snow. Reinhardt stands at the edge of the camp, the helmet tucked inside his coat like a fragile heartbeat he's afraid to expose to the cold. His men gather behind him, exchanging silent glances. They know that look on his face, the one that says he has already decided. "Sir, this is madness," one finally blurts. "Partisan territory stretches for miles. It's suicide to follow them."
Reinhard hears him, but the words slide past like drifting snow. Something deeper pulls at him now, something older than duty. The path he intends to walk is not one an officer chooses, it is one a brother follows. He steps forward, not with the rigid precision of command, but with the hesitant gravity of someone searching for a pulse in a battlefield that has forgotten mercy. The first clues are faint, a shallow depression in the snow, a broken twig, traces of movement left by people who travel lightly, who know the land better than any map ever could. Reinhard crouches, studying each mark with a tenderness that surprises even him. He used to read terrain like an enemy's handwriting, sharp, suspicious, threatening. Now he reads it like a diary written by strangers who offered his brother warmth when the world denied him everything else. They move through wide fields where frost clings to tall grass like crystal thread. Abandoned wagons lean sideways, wheels half buried, as if frozen mid-desperation. Smoke stains rise from old chimneys belonging to villages burned in earlier offensives. Each ruin humbles him further. Each charred doorway suggests a story his uniform was never designed to consider. His men follow reluctantly, expecting ambushes, mines, sudden bursts of gunfire. But Reinhard walks with gentler eyes. He pauses at a small fire pit, its ashes cold but undisturbed. Nearby lies a scrap of ration paper, folded with care, the handwriting faint but unmistakably foreign. He lifts it between gloved fingers, imagining Otto sitting near this same fire, translating, teaching, living. The hunter he has been trained to be, a man who stalks, corners, conquers, slowly dissolves. In his place stands someone softer, someone who kneels to study footprints as if they were relics. Each clue suggests Otto was among people who saw him not as an enemy, but as a fellow human carried by the same harsh winter. A cluster of thin birch trees guide the way, like quiet guardians. Reinhard brushes his hand against their white bark, feeling the cold seep through his gloves. Somewhere ahead, these same trees once sheltered his brother. The thought steadies him more than any command ever has. One of his men speaks again, but this time without defiance. "Captain, what are we looking for?" Reinhard answers without turning. Signs he lived, signs he mattered. The words hang between them, heavier than snow. Step by step, clue by clue, he moves deeper into enemy territory and, strangely, deeper into himself. The landscape no longer feels hostile. It feels like a trail of kindness preserved by winter, waiting for him to follow. The birch trees thin into a small clearing, their white trunks gleaming like quiet sentinels. Beyond them sits a ruined barn, slumped to one side, as if weary from carrying too many winters. Its roof has partially collapsed, and the boards along the walls have warped into crooked shapes. Yet something about it draws Reinhard forward. It feels less like an abandoned structure and more like a forgotten memory waiting to be uncovered. He approaches slowly, boots crunching on the frost-hardened ground. His men remain behind, watching their commander drift toward the building with the solemnity of someone approaching a grave. Reinhard pushes the door, and it groans in protest before swinging open. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of old hay, smoke, and faint traces of life. Light filters through cracks in the walls, falling in thin beams that illuminate pockets of the room. Reinhard steps into one of them and feels the temperature shift, not warmer, but strangely gentler. The first object he sees is a blanket, folded carefully despite the soot along its edges. Nearby lies a tin cup resting beside a makeshift fire pit, its ashes still gray and fine. These details alone are enough to stir something inside him, but the real blow comes when he spots a torn map pinned against the wooden beam, marked with charcoal strokes and tiny notes in rough Cyrillic. He moves closer. Beneath the map rests a small book, a German phrase book, its corners softened with use. Reinhard picks it up with trembling hands.
When he opens it, his breath catches. Scrawled between printed lines are familiar shapes, awkward loops and uneven strokes. Otto's
Handwriting, careful translations, simple sentences, notes written in the margins with the earnestness of someone trying to bridge a gap between worlds. For a long moment, Reinhardt simply stands there, the book open in his palms. The barn fades, and in its place, he imagines a scene, Otto seated on a straw mattress, laughing at his own attempts to pronounce Russian words while the partisans listened with amusement. He imagines them sharing bowls of thin soup, telling stories over a modest fire, finding comfort in simple routines that belonged to no ideology. He imagines his brother alive, not as a soldier, but as a young man who carved out a small place of warmth in a world determined to freeze him. Reinhardt's throat tightens. The officer who once measured life by orders, maps, and objectives now finds meaning in a blanket, a cup, a handwriting smudge. This barn, broken and half forgotten, feels more sacred than any battlefield monument. It is proof that war, despite its appetite for destruction, occasionally fails to extinguish the fragile, unguarded connections people build when no one is watching. For the first time in days, Reinhardt allows himself to hope. Reinhardt steps out of the barn with the phrase book still warm from his grip, though the air outside cuts sharply against his skin. Snow drifts softly among the birch trees, landing on the remnants of boot prints and wagon ruts. His men wait in a loose circle, keeping a wary watch on the forest beyond. The silence is unnaturally still, too still for a place once filled with partisan footsteps. A faint cracking sound breaks the stillness. Branches bending, someone's breath catching. Reinhardt raises a hand to halt his men, then moves toward the noise with deliberate steps. Behind a fallen birch trunk, half hidden beneath a wool coat patched a dozen times, crouches an elderly man. His face is pale, cheeks hollowed by winter and war. Thick glasses sit crooked on his nose, trembling just as violently as his hands. The moment he sees Reinhardt, panic floods his features. He stumbles upright, both hands shooting into the air. "Ne streliate," he cries. "Please, no shooting." Reinhardt instinctively lifts his rifle, then stops. Something in the old man's eyes, something raw and ancient, pulls him back from the brink. Instead of barking orders, instead of asserting authority as every regulation demands, he exhales and lowers his weapon first. The gesture confuses the old man. He blinks behind fogged lenses, unsure whether to flee or trust. Reinhardt steps closer, slowly. "I'm not here to hurt you." His voice is steady, but layered with a pleading undertone he cannot hide. "I need to ask one thing." The old man swallows, still shaking. "Ask," he whispers. Reinhardt holds up the phrase book, the pages fluttering in the cold. "Did you meet a German soldier, young, injured? He fixed tools, repaired things." For a moment, the old man's breath freezes mid-air. Recognition flickers across his face, not fear time, but memory. "Yes," he says softly. "I knew him." Reinhardt's lungs collapse inward. "He was here?" "Here," the old man nods, pressing a hand against his chest. "He worked, laughed, helped my grandson fix the stove. Good boy." Reinhardt's voice cracks. "What happened to him?" The old man's eyes dim with sorrow. "He left before the bombing, went west, toward the river. He said he hoped." The man hesitates, then finishes gently. "He hoped his brother was still alive." The words settle over them like falling snow, soft, devastating, honest. Around them, the war seemed to shrink, reduced to two men standing in the cold, bound not by uniforms, but by shared fear and fragile hope. One seeking news,
the other carrying the final memory of a stranger's kindness, and for a moment hatred found no place to stand. The villagers' directions lead Reinhardt west, where the birch forest thins into a long stretch of road carved through empty fields. The snow lies thinner here, as if even winter hesitated to cover what happened. Each step forward tightens the knot inside his chest. His men wait in heavy silence, aware that they have crossed from military pursuit into something far more personal, yet unable to turn back. The first sign is the smell, faint at first, then unmistakable. Burned timber, charred rubber, the lingering scent of a place torn open by violence. Reinhardt slows, eyes narrowing as the landscape confirms what his instincts already know. The road ahead is blackened, scarred, the earth churned by explosions and fire. What remains of the scene feels frozen in mid-chaos, as if the moment of destruction never fully ended. Scattered across the ground lie fragments of two armies, a German canteen twisted out of shape, a Soviet ammunition box blackened by flames, boots without owners, a section of wheel.
Still smoking at the edges. The wind drags thin wisps of ash across the snow, blurring the boundaries between white and gray. Everything about the site screams violence, panic, loss. Reinhardt forces himself forward. He expects, on some level, to find what every soldier fears: a body broken beyond recognition, a face he once knew rendered unrecognizable by war. The men behind him brace themselves as well, gathering quietly around the charred wreckage. But the road yields no remains, no corpses, no trace of a young man with Otto's stubborn chin and earnest smile. The absence is not comforting, it is worse. Reinhardt kneels beside a crater, his breath catching in his throat. For a moment he can't move. The silence around him deepens, becoming almost physical. He brushes aside a thin layer of soot and snow, and something metallic glints beneath it. A small tin, oval, dented, scorched at the edges. He lifts it carefully. Along the top are two carved letters, faint but unmistakable. O.M. Otto Müller. Reinhardt's hands begin to shake. His men look away, giving their commander the privacy they know he cannot ask for. The tin is warm from his touch, but everything else in him feels frozen. He closes his fingers around it, as if holding it too loosely might erase the initials. No body, no tracks, no certainty. Just this. Despair rushes up like a wave, sharp and suffocating. Yet beneath it, weak, stubborn, persistent, something else flickers. Hope. Not the loud, triumphant hope of propaganda posters, but the fragile, trembling kind, born from the simple fact that there is no proof of death, only disappearance. Reinhardt sinks to his knees fully now, the snow swallowing the sound of his collapse. He presses the tin to his forehead, eyes closing against a pain deeper than any wound he had carried. The ambiguity carves its own shape inside him, an open wound without an answer. But he realizes, in this moment of breaking, that certainty is not required for love to endure. Sometimes love survives in the spaces between truths, in the smoke that hides what we cannot bear to see, and what we still desperately hope for. He rises slowly, holding the tin as if it were a heartbeat he refuses to let slip away. Reinhardt returned to his unit with a gait unfamiliar even to himself. The men noticed it instantly. He no longer moved with the rigid mechanical precision that had once defined him,
a marching figure carved from discipline and iron. Now he walked slower, steadier, as if each step carried more than his own weight. And in a way it did. He carried Otto with him, in the tin pressed inside his coat, in the silence that wrapped around him like a second uniform, in the memories he imagined more vividly now than he ever had before. The helmet, battered, foreign, and once merely a clue, never left his side. He fastened it to his pack with deliberate care, treating it not as evidence of a disappearance, but as a symbol of the strangers who sheltered his brother. The men of the partisan camp were no longer faceless enemies. They were people who had shared their fire, their bread, their language with the boy Reinhard had once taught to ride a bicycle. Every glance at the helmet steadied him. It reminded him of the simple truth he had uncovered in the ruins. Someone had helped Otto. Someone had cared. That, in a war built on categories of enemy and ally, felt like a miracle. His behavior shifted in ways the men whispered about but did not dare question. When the Russian prisoner stumbled in the cold, Reinhard was the one who paused. He ordered that the man be given proper food, clean bandages, a blanket. He assigned 2 soldiers, not the cruel ones, to guard him, and made it clear, in a tone softer but more final than any shout, that the prisoner was not to be harmed. The whispers were immediate. Has the Oberlieutenant softened? Since when does he protect Russians? But beneath their confusion lay something else. Relief, maybe even respect. War had hardened all of them to breaking. Perhaps watching their commander reclaim a piece of humanity gave them permission to hope they could do the same. Reinhard said little. Words felt too fragile for the weight he carried. But his actions spoke plainly. Compassion, he realized, was not a luxury reserved for peaceful days. It was the only thing capable of surviving the brutality around them, the only thing worth carrying home. As he walked the lines that evening, the tin warm against his chest, he understood. Otto's fate might remain uncertain, but his life had not vanished into smoke. It had changed him. And that, in a world devouring itself, was its own form of survival. Years later, long after the front collapsed and the uniforms were boxed away like artifacts from another life, Reinhard kept only one relic in the open: the helmet. Its steel had dulled with time, the scratches softened by dust and memory, but the name inside, Otto Müller, remained sharp, carved as if refusing to fade. Reinhard placed it on a wooden shelf beside the window, where the morning light could warm the metal that once carried the cold of endless winter.
Visitors often mistook it for a war trophy. Reinhard never corrected them. How could he explain that the helmet wasn't a symbol of victory, but of the moment war's machinery cracked open and something human slipped through? In quiet evenings, when the house was still and the past felt close enough to touch, he would sit beside the shelf and let the memories return. Not the battles, not the orders shouted through smoke. Those had dimmed like distant thunder. What lingered instead were the fragments he pieced together on that frozen trail. A Russian boy with frost-bitten fingers offering him truth instead of defiance. An old villager trembling in fear until Reinhard lowered his rifle. The barn scattered with simple objects that smelled of warmth, routine, and kindness. He often wondered whether Otto had survived after leaving the partisans, whether he had found shelter, crossed a border, lived long enough to feel spring again. The uncertainty no longer tormented him. What mattered more was knowing that in the months after they were separated, Otto had not been alone. Strangers, supposed enemies, had kept him alive when his own army had abandoned him to the snow. That realization reshaped the world. It softened the edges of everything that had once seemed absolute. In a war, Reinhard would think, tracing the letters inside the helmet, a single name became a bridge between two languages spoken through fear, a bridge between men taught to hate, a bridge between who he had been and who he now chose to be. The helmet remained his quiet testament that cruelty could be answered by unexpected mercy, that even in landscapes scorched by hatred, small acts of care could survive like embers waiting to be found. And every time the morning sun lit the steel, Reinhard felt the same truth settle gently inside him. Humanity endures where war demands it should not.